Dust boiled on the auction yard, clogging throats and cracking the sky into a white-hot sheet. 5 cracked boards formed the block. Above them, 2 Apache sisters waited, wrists wrapped with frayed rawhide as thin as their breath. The elder Atsa kept her chin up, eyes sweeping the crowd like a hawk measuring thermals. The younger, Naeli, pressed both hands over a pouch of dried herbs tied to her belt, fingers trembling only when shadows crossed her bare feet. Bitters clustered in lazy arcs, ranch hands smelling of sweat and whiskey, gamblers fingering brass coins. One preacher whose gaze flickered between pity and purchase. Laughter rose whenever the auctioneer barked, "Next lot. 2 for 1 price. Can't beat that." Coins rang. Low offers meant a wound. Nobody saw what Atsa saw. Tracks in the dust, boots stamped by long, patient miles. Nobody felt what Naeli felt. The faint thrum of water far beneath the cracked ground, pulsing like a second heart. At the back edge, half in the shade of a warped colonnade, stood a man nobody had noticed arrive. Coat sun-bleached to ash, brim sagged over a scar that cut his jawline clean as a branding iron. Reuben Hawk, 15 years a rancher, 10 of them spent counting cattle bones under drought skies. 5 spent learning how silence could bleed a man without ever breaking skin. Atsa's gaze locked with it for the briefest tick. He did not look away. He lifted a hand, slow, as if testing weight he had not carried in decades, and stepped through heat waves toward the block. Closed now, dust coating his lashes, scar bright against stubble, a limp in his left stride. He stopped in front of the platform, unslung a leather pouch, thumped on the railing. Dull coins clacked, silver, not brass. Enough to buy a dozen healthy ranch hands. Certainly enough for 2 worn girls the crowd had already dismissed. "Stop," he said. "One word, raw as gravel. I'll buy them." The auctioneer's grin died. A hush dropped over the yard, thick as the dust. Somebody spat. Someone else muttered, "Old Hawk's gone soft." Reuben said nothing further, only held the auctioneer's stare until the gavel trembled, came down once, twice, sealing the sale. Rawhide snicked free. Atsa flexed her wrists, lifted Naeli's chin, then stepped down. Reuben turned, but instead of leading, he moved aside, offering open ground. The sisters followed on their own feet, passing jeers that now sounded smaller than flies on gut piles. They walked the full length of Main Street in that same order. Atsa first, spine straight, Reuben at her shoulder, Naeli behind, skirts brushing splinters. No one dared call after them. Something in the stillness around Reuben made noise feel like sacrilege. At the hitch rail waited a lean buckskin mare, ribs faint but eyes bright. Reuben helped Naeli mount, careful of blistered soles, then offered Atsa his canteen. She drank in short, measured swallows, wiped the rim, handed it to her sister. Only then did Reuben drink. They left town at a trot that soon slowed. Heat beat even steel nails soft. Miles unspooled, mesquite, sun-blasted arroyos, a single buzzard tracing circles too lazy to be ominous. Near dusk, they reached a gate of charred cedar. Beyond, rolling pasture color of hammered copper, a barn leaning like a tired drunk, and a stone well whose rope had frayed to white cords. 2 cows sheltered in slivers of shade, ribs playing xylophone with each breath. Reuben dismounted, untied 2 blankets from the saddle, spread them on the porch. He gestured, rest. Inside, he struck flint, coaxed match to life, set a coffee tin of water over a grudging flame. Pantry held little, 2 fists of beans, a crusted heel of salt pork, but he sliced, stirred, added a single dried chili. Smell curled into the room, rough but welcoming. Atsa sat by the doorway, watching how he moved. Naeli leaned against the wall, eyes half closed, yet she caught every sound. Fire popped, kettle hiss, the deep cough buried in Reuben's chest. He ladled 3 tin cups, passed them without a word. Beans slid down throats like apology. After, he placed the last slice of pork on a plate and pushed it toward the sisters. They split it by eye, no need to talk terms. Reuben chewed nothing, only drank scalding coffee until the cup shook. Moon crested, coyotes chorused. He rose, took his blanket outside, stretched it on hard boards under eaves. The sisters curled on the porch blankets, shoulder to shoulder. Just before sleep claimed him, Reuben heard Naeli whisper in fading Apache, "The earth here still breathes." Atsa answered with sound like wind over stone, agreement or prayer. Sometime in the black hour, dry thunder rolled. Reuben jerked awake, hand on an absent revolver. Not thunder. Cough, raking like claws across his ribs. Blood tasted iron in his mouth. He spat into dirt, steadying breath. Inside, Naeli's head lifted, owl swift. She crossed the porch, pressed a cool palm to his forehead. Eyes shining, she knelt, opened her medicine pouch, and laid a pinch of crushed root on his tongue. Bitter sap bit back the rattle. The cough eased. He managed, "Thank you," a phrase fallen out of use. She tilted her head, studying the shape of gratitude in an alien mouth, then smiled, small, tired, real. At dawn, Atsa traced fresh prints near the corral. Coyote headed south, unhurried. She nodded to Reuben and pointed to cracks in the well mortar. Water low, but reachable. He fetched rope, new bucket. Together they hauled a sludgy first draw, then clearer depths. Sun climbed. Sweat ran. The bucket rose full, sloshing hope on the dry stone. Naeli knelt, murmured over the water, dropped 3 leaves. Steam rose though the water was cold. She filled a gourd, handed it to Reuben. He drank, and the night's iron vanished from his throat. By noon, a dust devil spiraled on the western horizon. No storm, just wind kicking hunger out of dead ground. Atsa narrowed eyes. "Dust riders," she murmured in English learned from missionary scraps. Reuben followed her gaze. Tiny silhouettes, maybe men, maybe nothing, but the sky above them shimmered with heat that could become flame. He led the sisters to the barn's shade. "We'll need each other," he said quietly, surprised at the certainty in his own voice. Atsa's answer was simple. She untied a strip of buffalo hide from her braid and knotted it around his wrist. Naeli set her hand over his heart, pulse sinking for one breath. Then all 3 turned toward the shimmering west, where unknown dangers rode the wind, and the ranch waited to discover whether water, courage, and 2 unbowed sisters could revive land and man alike. The wind never stopped. 3 days after the auction, it stripped every cloud from the sky, scoured paint off the barn, and knotted Reuben's coat to his ribs. Water in the well sank another handspan. Trough algae turned bitter. At dawn, Atsa walked the fence line barefoot, head bent as if listening through her saws. She crouched, brushed dust from a hairline crack in the ground, then followed its twist down into the arroyo. Reuben trailed her at a distance, Winchester across his shoulder. She stopped where cottonwood roots clutched a rock seam and drove her knife between 2 stones. A damp breath sighed up. She stepped back. Reuben split the seam wider with a pick. Mud gleamed. He scooped, tasted grit-sweet water, felt something uncoil behind his breastbone. They cut a shallow channel to the corral. By noon, a finger of clear trickle tapped the trough. Cattle pressing muzzles to the new promise. Naeli buried rosemary sprigs along the channel edges. An hour later, thin shoots lifted, impossibly green against sun-bleached dirt. That night, Reuben roasted the last piece of jerky, divided it 3 ways. Atsa laid her share on the plate in front of him. He tried to refuse. She tipped her chin, payment for water. He chewed, throat tight. Moonlight found Naeli beside the mare. The animal's flanks heaved with heat stroke. Foam crusted its lips. The girl mixed mesquite ash, willow bark, and water in a horn cup, rubbed paste along the mare's gums, hummed until the trembling eased. Reuben watched from the doorway, scar itching where the fire years ago had kissed him. "You too carry storms inside," he whispered. Naeli glanced back, eyes reflecting starlight and exhaustion, but no fear. They slept on the porch. Reuben upright in a rocker, sisters curled on wool blankets. Sometime past midnight, hoofbeats drummed across the distant ridge. Reuben's eyes opened to darkness thick as cold dust. Atsa was already kneeling, ear to the floorboards, counting. She held up 3 fingers, slid her knife into her belt. At sunrise, the riders showed. 2 men and a boy half a man, beaten horses lathered, rifles slung open. They stopped at the gate, eyed the new water line, then the sisters. "Apache witches," the older barked. "Your water is cursed. Hand them back." Reuben stepped past the trough. My land. My guests. The boy's rifle lifted. His hand shook like a tin roof in wind. Atsa spoke for the first time in town English. Cloud comes. You choose shade or fire. The boy blinked, lowered the barrel. Older man spat, cursed Reuben's scar jaw, turned his horse. Dust swallowed them, but the promise of return hung heavier than the heat. That evening the cough started. First a tickle in Reuben's lungs, then a rake of glass. He knelt by the well, spit flecks of red. Naeli steadied him, press-palmed his back, felt ribs quake. She brewed sage, honey, and a pinch of her last sacred resin, made him drink until sweat beaded on his brow. He slept in the rocker, dreams burning with faceless riders, and Mary's skillet cooling on an untouched stove. Atsa sat cross-legged on the roof ridge, watching two dust columns on distant flats merge into one darker streak. She slid the hide strip tighter around her braid, whispered something to the setting sun, then climbed down. Inside, Naeli crushed more herbs, eyes rimmed with fatigue. Reuben woke, caught her wrist. If I fall, take the mare south. Water's yours. She shook her head, placed his hand on her heart, said one word in Apache that sounded like root anchored in stone. They kept night watch in shifts. Reuben's fever climbed. Naeli dripped willow tonic onto his tongue, cooled his chest with damp cloth. At dawn he could stand, but the sky to the east glowed the color of molten iron, wildfire or sunrise impossible to tell. He saddled the mare anyway, loaded a single canteen, slung the Winchester. Atsa blocked the gate, palm up, track say storm. Storm comes here. She motioned the barn loft, pointed to the narrow rafters, a plan born in a gesture. They spent the day sawing half-rotted beams, stacking hay bales into blind walls, coating them with wet dirt from a new channel. Naeli painted sigils of ash on each post. Reuben didn't ask meaning. He could feel them tighten the air like drawn bowstrings. At dusk the three riders returned, double to 5, kerosene torches swaying. Reuben walked to the gate alone, rifle low. Water's ours, the leader said, voice cracking from the ride. It was dirt yesterday, Reuben replied. Still here for the taking. A price then, the witches. Behind him he heard the barn door creak. Atsa sliding into rafters. Naeli unseen among hay. Leader raised torch. Wind caught flame, bent it toward the dry grass. Reuben lifted Winchester, fired into sky. Echo slapped the flats. Horses reared. From the loft a hail of stones rained. Atsa's marksmanship. Torches dropped, sputtered out on wet berm. One rider swore, blind-fired. Bullet slammed trough, water fontaining. Naeli stepped from shadow, flung a clay pot. It shattered, releasing smoke so thick horses screamed. Through the haze, Atsa leapt, clubbed the leader's wrist with plank. Rifle fell. Reuben booted it into the trench. Silence broke under the groan of a colt shouldering free. Unarmed, choking on herb smoke, raiders turned tail, disappearing into the same dusk that had delivered them. Only the boy remained, cornered against the channel, eyes wide. Atsa stood over him but did not raise her plank. Instead, she pointed to the water line, then to the sky glowing with distant lightning. He looked, nodded once, dropped his revolver into mud, and fled. Rain followed, first sparse, then pounding. It filled the new channel, overflowed into furrows Naeli had seeded that morning. Reuben staggered, let the sky wash fever from his skin. Naeli pressed her forehead to his ribs, feeling the cough loosen under pummel of water. Atsa lifted face to cloudburst, braid plastered the spine, eyes bright as struck flint. They did not speak. Words would drain power for what the sky, the earth, and two unbowed sisters had done. When dawn broke, the well brimmed. Rye seedlings dotted the mud. Reuben brewed coffee strong enough to float a horseshoe. The sisters drank without flinching. He laid 3 silver coins, last of his pouch, on the table. Payment, he said. Atsa pushed them back. Naeli placed her pouch of herbs beside the coins, then closed his fingers over both gifts. Debt repaid in circle, not in metal. Out in the field, the mare nipped shoots bursting through last season's ash. A hawk circled overhead, lone but not lonely. Reuben watched it, felt the scar on his jaw grow lighter under the rising sun. Lightning still flickered far off, as though reluctant to leave. Yet the ranch had taken a hush that felt like grace. Rain-soaked ground gleamed bronze under a hesitant sunrise. Reuben poured the last of yesterday's coffee onto the porch rail to make room for fresh, then realized the pot already brimmed. Naeli had risen early. Steam drifted past the scar and carried a scent of cedar bark she'd added to ease his cough. Atsa stood in the corral, eyes shut, boots buried ankle-deep in mud. She traced slow circles in the air, palms up, coaxing the mare forward one careful step at a time until the animal lowered its head against her chest. Reuben had broken horses with rope and grit. She did it with silence. He slung the Winchester on a nail by the door and stepped into new work. They dragged charred rails in the ruined west fence, stacked them for firewood, and set green posts from the arroyo cottonwoods. Esme, quiet as a shadow since the raid, plaited yucca fibers in the cord to bind the posts. Marigold, ankle nearly healed, limped along the furrows, planting beans 2 finger lengths apart, murmuring a counting rhyme in a language no one else knew. At midday, Reuben spread ration biscuits on a plank table and unwrapped a wedge of salt pork he'd been saving for harder times. The sisters had already filled the gap with roasted mesquite pods and a tin of wild honey pilfered from a half-split log. They ate in the half-shade of the barn. No one talked of yesterday's fire. The smoke had gone, only faint scorch marks on the trough remembered. Naeli rose first, motioned Reuben to follow, and led him to a patch where water seeped from a new channel. She knelt, cut 3 shallow grooves, and pressed into each a different seed. Corn squash beans. She covered them, smoothed the mud, then placed his broad palm over the mound. 3 sisters, she whispered, the only word she spoke all day. Something in Reuben's chest loosened. He kept his hand there until he felt heat rise from the soil like a slow exhale. By dusk the sky blushed rose and indigo. Atsa climbed the hayloft ladder and emerged holding a long object wrapped in canvas. She knelt before Reuben unrolled it. A cedarwood bough, recurved and polished, strung with braided horsehair. She tapped his chest, then tapped the rifle on the nail. Trade. Reuben considered. His Winchester held 1 cartridge now, a dull click of memory. He lifted it down, balanced its weight against the bough, and nodded. Atsa's smile was brief, but brighter than any sunrise he remembered. That night they built a fire in the orchard clearing, and set 3 stones for a pot of rabbit stew. Reuben fetched a ledger, sat cross-legged beside the flames, and opened the page of names. He added 1 more line. Land to be divided come harvest, Hawk plus sisters. He dipped the pen again, hesitated, then crossed out the plus and wrote Hawk and sisters. And under that, water shall belong to roots that drink it. He felt eyes on him. Naeli stood there, arms folded against night chill. She read the line with a lantern's help, considered it as though tasting unfamiliar fruit, then laid a smooth river stone onto the page. The stone bore 3 river-etched rings. She closed a ledger on it, sealing the pledge. Wind carried a distant rattle. Wagon wheels. Marshal Mulligan's buckboard creaked into view, lantern bobbing. He climbed down, handed Reuben a folded cloth. Inside lay a deed stamped with a county seal and notarized by 3 townsfolk. Water rights, mineral rights, and 50 head of feral cattle found wandering after the raid, all signed over to Reuben Hawk for services rendered. Mulligan tipped his hat to the women, acknowledging their share without daring to voice it. Reuben read the parchment in firelight, then held it over the flames until edges browned. He pulled away before it burned through, tore it in half, handed 1 piece to Naeli, the other to Atsa. "You're ground, too," he said. They tucked the halves into their medicine pouch and arrow quiver, respectively, binding ink to heart and hand. Before leaving, Mulligan produced a small burlap sack. Inside clinked silver dollars, bounty for the captured horses and surrender rifles. Reuben tried to return it. Mulligan shrugged, pointed west where the cloud bank glowed with heat lightning. "Bad times keep coming," he said. "Better meet them with full pockets." Then he rode off, wagon fading like a ghost into mesquite shadows. Rain threatened again. The sisters dragged bedrolls into the half-built tack shed, where warm earth smelled of clay and new straw. Reuben sat on the porch rocker staring at the empty yard, listening. No cough rattled his chest. Moon rose, high and white, and for the first time, he did not flinch at the memory of firelight. He felt movement behind. Atsa draped a blanket over his shoulders, pressed the silver bounty sack into his palm. "Seed," she said. Then she tilted her head at the sky, miming falling rain. He understood. Use the silver to dig a deeper well, buy grain before the next drought. She backed away, leaving him alone with thoughts heavier than any coin. A breeze stirred, bringing the scent of damp sage. Reuben opened the blanket and poured half the coins inside, tying the ends in a knot. He set the bundle against the door of the tax shed. The remaining half he pocketed for well, stone, and flour. Balance, like three sisters in one hill. Morning crawled over the horizon and found Naeli kneeling in a row of germinating beans, humming a song that braided Spanish lullaby with Apache cadence. She pressed fingers to the new stalks, then to Reuben's wrist, measuring pulse against the green. Across the yard, Marigold shot a hawk from the hens. The bird lifted, circled once, and drifted beyond the far ridge where smoke had once blackened the sky. Reuben walked to the fence line, sighted along the post toward the cracked horizon. Heat shimmered, but he saw no riders. He looked back, Atsa practicing with a cedar bough, arrows thudding into an old wagon wheel. Naeli sprinkling crushed lavender on the mare's feed, Esme and Beth laughing over a crooked road they would recede, Marigold coaxing a calf to the gap of a rebuilt gate. He set his hand on the top rail, scarred knuckles white against sun silverwood, and whispered the words that had burned inside his chest since the auction yard. "I was dead ground. You brought the rain." Somewhere in the orchard the first peach blossom opened, pale against blackened bark. Petals drifted on the lightest breeze and landed at Reuben's boots. He stooped, scooped handfuls of dirt, let them pour through his fingers, watching tiny grains catch sunlight. Beneath his feet the earth felt less like a grave and more like a drum, already thrumming with the next story it would insist on growing. Autumn slipped across the valley like a long sigh. Mornings came dressed in silver mist that smelled faintly of apples, and Reuben Hawk traded his sweat-stiff shirt for Mary's old duster, freshly mended by Beth's quick hands. Beans climbed shoulder-high along the new trellis. Corn tasseled gold. Squash swelled beneath broad leaves like sleeping suns. The four sisters rose before first light to weed until their knuckles matched the soil, and Reuben rose with them, his cough now only a memory, his stride easy between Atsa's silent nods and Naeli's half-hummed prayers. One dawn, he found Beth at the well. Sleeves rolled. She drew a full bucket and set it at his boots. Water stayed clear all the way to the brim, mirroring two faces, freckles and scars, dark braids and gray stubble. The well was no longer a hole that swallowed rope and hope. It was a mirror showing who they had become. 3 days later, frost glazed awry, and harvest began in earnest. Marigold's laugh skipped across the orchard as she balanced twin baskets of squash on her head. Esme tottered behind with corn so tall it hid her, except for her dancing feet. Atsa paced the fence line, watching dust for riders that never came. Reuben stacked grain sacks in the loft where a roof tin no longer leaked, then chalked tallies on the door. He stopped at the number 40, more than he and Mary had saved in any good year, and set down the chalk just to breathe. Late afternoon, a single rider approached. The preacher from the auction, hat in hand, apology already forming. He carried a letter sealed in blue wax. The railroad offered $5 a tree for cross ties. Reuben read, smiled without teeth, and said all his trees were planted for shade, birds, and girls' laughter. The preacher saw those girls braiding onion tops, tipped his hat again, and rode on. Whenever work paused, Naeli coaxed him onto the porch to brew salves, one for suncrack, one for winter cough, one simply for warmth that smelled of crushed mint. She smeared the last along the mare's gums, then dabbed a dot on Reuben's wrist. Her smile lingered long after. Clouds gathered thick and dry. Atsa watched their bellies. Thunder but no rain, too much lightning. She and Reuben soaked saddle blankets, draped them across the roof, packed the clay trench with fresh mud. Lightning cracked, but the firebreak held, and when real rain finally came, it drummed friendly music on tin. They stood under the eaves, shoulders brushing, sharing Mary's old mug of chicory. Atsa pointed skyward, explaining thunder in gestures. Reuben listened, tasting new meanings in the dark. Sun returned on peaches of cloudless blue. Snow dusted the slopes early, and winter settled quiet and clean. Frost etched spider webs along the rail. Smoke curled steady from the iron stove Reuben bought with half the bounty coins. Evenings turned to lessons, Beth sounding out novel paragraphs, while Reuben corrected gently, Esme sketching stronger fences by lamplight as Atsa guided her wrist, Naeli teaching Reuben Apache words for a route, river, home. He practiced until the syllables fit his tongue, and they laughed each time he swallowed a consonant. On the longest night, they opened Mary's last jar of peach preserves. Reuben sat in the table center. Naeli took the first spoon, eyes widening at the sweetness. Passed it on. Round the jar went until only syrup coated glass. Reuben tipped the jar over the hearth. The hiss scented the cabin with ghosts made gentle by time. Spring arrived early. Water ran clear in the channel. Wheat blades pierced the soft ground. Reuben traded 2 calves for a cider press and started a goat pen because the sisters dreamed of cheese. Work filled every corner of light. Esme humming while sharpening a draw knife, Beth teaching the mare to take an apple slice from her lips, Marigold scattering corn for chickens that hadn't existed 3 months prior. On the first full-bloom day, Reuben gathered everyone beneath the young peach. He carried the ledger under one arm and a cedar stake under the other. He planted the stake beside the tree, then tore from the ledger the page of 8 names. He rolled it with Mary's thimble and Atsa's arrowhead, slid the bundle into a glass jar, sealed it, buried it at the roots. Over the dirt, he carved one word into the stake. Belong. When he looked up, the sisters formed a crescent. Naeli placed her palm on his chest, felt the sure beat, then guided his hand across each of their hearts. 8 pulses joining. She whispered a word he now recognized. Sinani, all of us. He answered in English. Home. Rain threatened again. They hauled bedding onto the porch to watch the storm roll in. Clouds layered dark upon darker. Lightning flickered mute beyond the ridge. Naeli rested her head on Reuben's shoulder. Atsa leaned against the post. Beth and Esme shared a blanket. Marigold dozed between them. Wind riffled the ledger's empty cover, but no pages remained to fill. Only the night ahead, vast and unwritten. Reuben stared at the yard where once he'd seen only graves. Now wheat tufted green. Goats nosed a new trough. The mare nickered to a flock of restless hens, and the young peach shimmered with petals like pale lanterns in the wind. He felt tears rise, not of grief or relief, and let them fall unheard beneath the thunder. Storm broke just before dawn, rain rinsing every surface clean. As pale light spread, Reuben stepped into mud cold enough to wake every nerve, crossed the peach, and found a single blossom fallen at its base. He lifted the petal, placed it in his palm, and noticed the scar on his jaw no longer felt tight. Atsa approached with 2 bows, hers and the one she crafted for him. She set his in his hands, pointed toward the horizon where coyotes yipped. Guardians needed tools. But her eyes said the fence was strong, and the coyotes sing only to announce morning. He slipped the bow over his shoulder, walked back to porch, and found Naeli feeding the stove. She looked up, the glow painting her features in ember gold. Without a word, he took the kettle, poured water, sat beside her, and watched steam curl as steady as a vow. Outside, the wind carried no smoke, only the scent of damp sage and budding rye. The earth felt less like ground that could burn and more like a drum, throbbing with seed and hoofbeat and a quiet song of 8 names rooted deeper each sunrise. If this journey from dust and fire to belonging stirred you, tap subscribe, leave a like, and tell us in the comments which moment, asterisk the auction stand, the rain-forged firebreak, or the peach tree name belong, echoed loudest in your heart. Your words help the next story take root.